So, The Matrix is pretty good, isn't it? It's one of the most influential movies that's ever been made. It's got groundbreaking visual effects technology, memorable action scenes, and a exploration of the psychological, philosophical, and religious themes that you don't typically see in action blockbusters of this kind. And what I think makes the movie work really well, what makes it a work of genius, in my opinion, is not just the presence of these individual elements, because these elements have been done or explored in other mediums, and arguably they've been done better on an individual level, but the combination of these things together in a way that makes it easy for an average audience member to understand. And it seems that people agree, because even all the time that's passed since it's released, The Matrix is a movie that we still talk about. It's still present in our pop culture and in our cultural psyche. But the same cannot be said about its two sequels. They have a reputation of being overly long and overly indulgent on the part of the directors, and the way that the Wachowskis decided to expand the lore and themes of the world has been divisive, to say the least. And I do think that there's some truth to these criticisms, particularly in the execution of some of the core ideas. For example, that people point to, there's a conversation that Neo has with the architect at the end of The Matrix Reloaded, and they throw a lot of information at you in a very short period of time, and it's not as easy for an average audience member to keep up. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the sequels are bad, which is what some people go so far as to say they are, or that they don't contribute to the world of the first movie in a meaningful way. I disagree with that idea quite heavily, and I think that whether it was intentional or not, what the Wachowskis did with the sequels actually ties into the themes of the first movie quite well, and that's what I want to explore today. And I want to explore it using specific parts of the three movies to prove my point. Specifically the parts where Neo interacts with the agents, and specifically Smith in the sequels. I think that these interactions serve as a microcosm for the themes and motivations of the whole trilogy, and you can trace Neo's journey from beginning to end by looking at these interactions in chronological order. So, let's begin. The first interaction Neo has with the agents is during his attempted escape from the office and his subsequent interrogation. During this scene, the agents are after information on Morpheus, who Neo has been in contact with, and despite his attempts, Neo is unable to resist them, and they succeed in planting a bug within him. Now, the scene takes place before Neo has escaped the Matrix, and before he even really understands what it is, and as a result, he doesn't understand the threat that the agents represent. From his point of view, they are just standard government thug types, and so when they reveal some of the abilities they possess by sealing Neo's mouth shut and planting the bug, which still creeps me out to this day, only then does Neo express fear and a desperation to get away, even though he is absolutely powerless to do so. This is also Neo's first real proof that something is not quite right with his world. This is the proof of the itching feeling at the back of his head being somewhat correct. So, after this, Neo is freed from the Matrix. He's told about the nature of the real world, and is also told about the prophecy of the One, and that Morpheus believes that Neo will fulfill that prophecy. Neo's next interaction is his subway fight with Smith, but before we get there, we have to look at a couple of smaller scenes that take place before that. The first is the agent training program, the Woman in Red program that Morpheus takes Neo on. This just serves to establish the agents as the force Neo will have to overcome in order to eventually save humanity as the One. The second is Morpheus's fight with Smith, in which he sacrifices himself to save Neo. This is just to show the audience how dangerous Smith specifically is. He easily beats the guy who easily beat Neo, and Neo will be in real serious trouble if they encounter each other. Now we get to the subway fight. At this point in the story, Neo and Trinity have saved Morpheus from an impossibly dangerous situation, and he's starting to understand his own abilities. Morpheus and Trinity escape, but Neo is trapped with Smith in the subway. Now, as an audience, we understand that Smith is capable of easily dispatching Neo because of the fight that we saw with him and Morpheus, but Neo doesn't know that. When Neo makes the choice to fight instead of run, he does so out of faith rather than understanding of the threat that he's encountered. And Neo does not do well in this fight. He gets one or two good, decent shots in, but at no point does he take control from Smith. Not only that, but he gets incredibly lucky that Smith gets run over by the train. But this can't really be considered a victory for Neo because Smith reemerges immediately. And the moment Neo sees Smith when he gets off the train is the moment Neo realizes that it's pointless to fight because he cannot win. His only option left is to run. Which brings us to the end of the first movie and Neo's death and resurrection. Not that one. And this is the point where Neo finally gains an awareness and understanding of the world around him. He sees the Matrix for what it really is, and as a result, the agents that have been an invincible enemy over our protagonists this whole movie are no longer a match for him. He is above them. They can't even touch him. He quite literally takes Smith apart, and the other agents have no other choice but to run away from him. Neo has finished the first part of his journey here. He's become the one, and now nothing can stand in his way. And it wraps the first movie up pretty well. Neo has an understanding of the world that he's in, the real world, his role in it, supposedly, and all that's left is to go on and save humanity. So, what comes next? Neo's first interactions with the agents in The Matrix Reloaded is when he easily defeats the upgraded versions that interrupt the meeting of the captains. This just reinforces what we learnt at the end of the first movie, that Neo is above them. He's achieved godlike abilities in this world, and the opponents that gave him so much trouble in the last movie, the upgraded opponents, I should say, that gave him so much trouble in the last movie, are now nothing compared to him. The next scene, and in my opinion one of the most important ones, is where Neo and Smith meet again. But it's important to note that this scene comes immediately after a conversation that Neo has with the Oracle. You see, despite being the One, and despite knowing the prophecy he's meant to fulfill, Neo doesn't really know what he's supposed to do. He has a conversation with Trinity in the beginning of the movie, and her response when he tells her about her concerns is essentially just, oh, don't worry about it, Neo, because the Oracle's going to call at some point and she'll just tell you what to do. It's fine, it'll be fine, don't worry about it, it's fine. In fact, after Neo defeats the upgraded agents, he first travels to see the Oracle to see if he can find her, instead of seeing if Morpheus and Trinity are okay. Eventually, Neo does find the Oracle, but the conversation that the two of them have doesn't exactly help him. He's told what he should do next, but he doesn't understand why. And this is something that the Merovingian even brings up to taunt Neo in their first meeting. So Neo is, in a way, in a similar state to where he was at the start of the first movie. He lacks understanding, he knows his purpose, but he doesn't know how to achieve it. And then there's Smith. After his defeat by Neo, Smith fully understands his purpose and what he's supposed to do. His defeat only served to unshackle him from the limitations that were put upon him by his machine creators. He's focused and driven and knows exactly what to do and exactly how to do it. For Smith, it's simply a matter of time. And so the two of them meet and they fight. And Neo cannot win this fight. He tries his best and he lasts as long as he can, but there's no way he can beat Smith, because he doesn't understand the threat that Smith poses, and it serves as a reminder that despite being supposedly the strongest entity in the world, he's powerless to solve a problem that he doesn't understand. So Neo does the only thing that he can do, and he retreats. This idea is reinforced by their next meeting, where Neo, Morpheus, and the Keymaker are on their way to see the architect, and Smith interrupts them. And again, he serves the same role. He's a blockade that Neo cannot just push past. He cannot physically defeat Smith. His only option is to find a way around him. And now we proceed to the end. A lot happens between Neo's final meeting with Smith in The Matrix Reloaded and his first with him in The Matrix Revolutions. He learns that the prophecy is a lie, it's another system of control created by the machines, and that humanity will be destroyed soon, and it's partially his fault due to his choice to save Trinity at the end of the last movie. He gets trapped in a sort of limbo situation he can't escape from without help, and he learns something about the nature of programs that exist within the machine world. And he decides to head to the source code of the machine world in a somewhat hopeful attempt to save the human race. But he decides to leave without really knowing what he's going to do. And this brings us to his first meeting with Smith. Just before he and Trinity leave on the ship that Niobe has allowed them to take, they're ambushed by Bane, who is being possessed by Smith. Neo gets hurt badly in this fight, but I think that this fight here is where the scales are finally balanced between the two. Neo finally understands the threat that Smith poses, not just to himself, and not just to humanity, but to the machines as well. In this moment, Neo understands what he needs to do, even if he doesn't know how he's quite going to do it. This ties into losing his eyes as well. He doesn't need to look for a path anymore, he's found it. Now he just has to walk it. Which brings us to the conclusion of the story and the resolution of its thematic and character conflict. Neo versus Smith one last time with the fate of everything at stake in a version of the Matrix that is falling apart. Neo fights for the survival of the humans and the machines, while Smith seeks their complete destruction. However, Neo can't beat Smith, and he goes into this fight knowing that even before he enters the Matrix. But it doesn't matter because he finally understands what he has to do. He's accepted it, and at the end, he sacrifices himself willingly in the name of peace. And this is something Smith doesn't understand, and it destroys him. Neo saves the world, he saves humanity, he saves the machines, and he brokers a truce between them that may or may not last, but he's done his job. He's done what he finally understands that he was supposed to do. You'll have noticed that throughout this I talk a lot about characters understanding themselves and understanding the situations that they're in. And I think that this is the main thing that should be taken away from these movies. A lot of the discussion around them revolves around the concept of choice, but where the sequels do a lot of the heavy lifting is by saying that you can only really make good choices if you understand what it is you're choosing, if you understand the consequences, and you also understand yourself and the nature of the world around you. Even with the power of a god, Neo doesn't know what he's supposed to do for a large part of the series. He's told what he's supposed to do, but this isn't the same thing as knowing it for himself. And this is something that you can discover for yourself quite easily if you speak to a lot of people. If you went out right now and asked 100 people, what is it you really want? What is it you're here to do? How many people do you think would be able to give you a real answer? I've done something similar to this, and I would say that you would be lucky if 5% of people you asked gave you a real answer that actually seemed truthful and honest. Because you can give people every advantage in the world, but if they don't understand what they want or how to get it, they'll be trapped in this sort of limbo. They won't be able to move forward, and this is where people begin to believe that their lives have no direction. They get trapped in repetitive jobs or destructive behaviours, and they feel like there's nothing else for them to do. So you have to find meaning in your life before you can solve the problems that you're faced with. And I think this is an issue that Neo faces throughout the trilogy. It's not a physical challenge, it's a spiritual one, and this is the glue that holds the movies together. And I think that if you remove Reloaded and Revolutions, then you lose a large part of what the point is. And the point is that you really need to understand yourself to understand your purpose.